Thank you, Sarah, for that very kind introduction, and thank you and Rob for the invitation to come here. It's very nice to see so many old friends, and also people I'm just meeting and getting to be friends with. So it's a very resonant occasion for me. I just met, or re-met, a fellow. We were students together, I just found out, at Princeton. He was a year ahead of me, and he was a kind of mythic figure there for a group of us. We called him the Horseman, and that he should show up after all these years. It's part of what I mean by resonance. I'm going to begin with a poem from Splay Anthem, which was published about 4 years ago. And as Sarah mentioned, it's a braiding of 2 serial poems that I've been working on for years, Song of the Ondumbulu and Mu. And in the course of the Mu sequence, there come to be a number of poems whose titles echo the titles of an essay I did, Sound and Sentiment, Sound and Symbol. Sound and Sentiment is the title of a book by anthropologist Stephen Feld. It was about the Kaluli of Papua New Guinea, and specifically about their sense of music and poetic language. They have a story that they tell about a boy who turns into a mooney bird, a fruit dove with a red beak. And I use that story along with some reflections on music by Victor Zuckerkandl in a book called Sound and Symbol to try to sketch out some senses of the relationship between music and writing, which has been something I've been concerned with over the years. The story of the mooney bird is the story of a boy who goes out hunting for crayfish with his sister, and she catches some and he catches none, and he asks her to share hers, and she refuses to do so, which is a very grievous violation of Kaluli etiquette, and especially for this to happen between kin. And eventually, after unsuccessfully asking her to share, he begins to transform. His nose turns into a red beak. His arms turn into wings, become feathered, and he turns into a mooney bird and flies away, saying that this is a consequence of her not sharing her food with him. You're crayfish you would not share with me, and I've become a bird. For the Kaluli, to speak poetically and to speak musically is to talk like a bird. And it has to do with that severance, that loss of social sustenance that's signified by the story of the boy who became a mooney bird. And I found in the course of writing the Mu poems, which go back to Don Cherry's album Mu, first part, Mu, second part, and thinking about music, that this story just kept coming back to me. So there are a number of poems, of which this is the second in the Mu series, that echo that title. It's called Sound and Sentience, and you can hear how some of the figuration from the story of the boy who turned into a mooney bird comes in. Scales what would once have been skin, feathers what would once have been cloth. There that claiming heaven raised hell, fraught sublimity, exits evermore to come. A drum's head it was we walked on, beats parsed out by ghost feet, proto-ghost feet our feet had become. It was a dream of beaten earth, beaten air, beaked extravagance, birds we'd eventually be. Albeit feeling took flight's place, flight familiarity's run, movement found our feet what once had been wood. We stood as one, stung wood's revival. Pinocchio was on the box. Puppet run, strung wood, stumped trumpet, bugled admonition, spun. It wasn't swirl we wandered into, circling wind we considered moot, a way we had of running in place. Phantom limbs they were we ran on, ghost feet they were. Nubs that had once been feet lost their numbness, feeling it made us run. It was feeling's return we ran with. Irredentist earth beneath our feet felt good. Irredentist earth fell away from our feet as we kept running, ran from day one long before day one. Proto-ghost, entourage. Leg Anthem, the music intimated. Spooks it now was on the box. We were anything but there, though not elsewhere. Rhythmically elect, but loosed even so. Earth, the dream of drums, come true. It wasn't puppets we were. Strings tied to what had been wood, notwithstanding, wasn't we were wood anymore. Runaway earth, abrupt cut from under. Ricochet and reach, rival names we knew it by. Blinked, and before we got there were gone. Proto-ghosthood, its own haunt. So that run it seemed it was we came to next. A place, had it been a place, made of whisk, borne away what sea? Blur. Blent vista such that splinters reared up and walked, went remittless. Endless reconnoiter, endless vex, revisitation. Endless hoist and hoofbeat, limbed on high. Comings and goings not gotten over. Death not gotten over. Goings away glimpsed again had us gone without going. On to the heard about city, sounded out. This is a book called Nod House. It's a continuation of Splay Anthem in the books before, a continuation of the weave of Mu and Song of the Andumbulu, and it will be published next year, 2011. This is a poem that draws on the Day of the Dead. It's called Day After Day of the Dead. It's in the Mu series, Mu 8th part. Mu, of course, goes back to music and to muthos and to mouth. And there's a connection to not only to Don Cherry, but to Charles Olson's reflections on muthos. He'd like to call himself a muthologist. So mouth food started coming into these poems in a way I hadn't expected, and this is one of the ones in which that occurred. Day after day of the dead. While we're alive, we kept repeating. Tongues, throats, roofs of our mouths bone dry. Skeletons we'd someday be. Panicky masks we wore for effect, more than effect, more real than we'd admit. No longer wanting to know what soul was, happy to see shadow, no touch. Happy to have sun at our backs, wayled by shadow, happy to have bodies block light. Afternoon sun lighting leaf, glint of glass, no matter what, about to be out of body it seemed. Soon to be shadowless, we thought, said we thought, not to be off guard, caught out. Gray morning we meant to be done with, requiem so sweet we forgot what it lamented, teeth turning to sugar, we grinned. Day after day of the dead we were desperate, dark what the night before we saw lit, bones we'd eventually be. At day's end, a new tally, but there it was, barely begun. Rock the clock tower let go of, iridescent headstone, moments rebuff. Soul we saw, said we saw, invisible imprint. No one wanted to know what soul was. Day after day of the dead, we were deaf, numb to what the night before we said moved us, fey lights coded locale. I fell away, we momentarily gone, deaf but to brass's obsequy, low brasses croon begun. I fell away, not fast, floated, momentary mention in accord with the wind, day after day of the dead, the same as day before day of the dead. No surprise, I fell away muttering, knew no one would hear, not even me. We wore capes under which we were in sweaters out at the elbow. Arms on the table, we chewed our spoons. Mouthing the blues, moaned an abstract truth, kept eating. The dead's morning after buffet, someone said it was. Feast of the unfed, said someone else. What were we doing there, the exegete kept asking. Adamant, uninvited, morose. Elbows in the air like wings, we kept eating, rolled our eyes, kept shoveling it in. Day after day of the dead, we were them. We ate inexhaustibly, ate what wasn't there. Dead, no longer dying of thirst, hung over, turned our noses up to what was. It was me, we were it, insensate. Sugared sweat, what we drank, tasted like. Even so, the tips of our tongues tasted nothing. We sipped without wincing. We ate cakes, we ate fingernail soup, a new kind of gazpacho, no one willing to say what soul was. Knucklebone souffle we ate gristle. Eyes we took from flies, flying backward, a kind of caviar, none of us wanting to say what soul was. And this is another poem, Mu 51st part, and another in that series of poems whose title echoes sound and sentiment, sound and symbol. This called Sound and Sustenance. Nod House is kind of an inward book. It's divided into two parts. The first part is called Quag. The second part is called Quag. War is noise in the background. There's a poem early on that talks explicitly about that, but for the most part, it's a kind of hum that is accessed now and again. It comes into this poem, that hum kind of comes up a bit here. But really, it's a poem about carnival. We stood on a balcony, if not motherless, mothered by morning's retreat, the orphans we'd eventually be. Carnival's end came accosting the rooftops, Quag's necropolitan skyline, a perch it seemed we stood on, looking out from, looking down. We stood on our perch, feathered arms, feathered bodies, feathered legs, rib cages, bird cage thin. We stood on a flagpole, feet clutching the ball we stood perched on, waving the pole we stood on, possessed. Two-bodied birds, it turned out we were. Nub's necropolitan outpost, a robot baton we stood on both ends of. Two-bodied birds dressed in double-breasted suits, it turned out, tar bodies underneath. Where we stood intimated what soul was. Unsung saeta, set to moot accompaniment. Time tore by below. We stood on a ledge. We stood on a plank. Where we stood shook the threads of our suits loose. Wind blew through skin, it seemed. Where we stood infiltrated curvature, core. Nothing lay deep enough to escape. At our backs blared echoing brass, reminiscent regard, upstart regret. Where we stood, impudent reeds kept at us. Yesterday's news borne by chorusing bells again. Carnivals gone again, kiss. Pigeons, what we thought were doves cooing. Shrugged, how were we to know? Rats with wings, Itamar said. We threw rocks at them. We of the golden shoulders, we of the golden elbows, we of the ecstatic barrage. What had been brass became guitar clamor, we whose heads lay elsewhere caught in cross cover. Anaman Sandrafia was on again. We were in Abidjan, crossroads ken, perch-turned undulant roadway. Where we stood was a ridge we strode across, strode standing still all the same. Balcony rail we leaned against, clung or would cling to, buoyed by background clang, declamation, sound our lone support, sole sustenance, sound our adjutant, ghost. It wasn't Abidjan we were in, but only seemed so. Sound's insinuation egged us on. Carnival's end was afoot, ever after's morning after, long since not what it once had been. There we stood, leaning forward, one hand gripping the balcony rail, the other an Asafo flag. We were on the Asafo flag, two-headed eagles holding headless rope. We were Nub's Necropolitan Police. We were on the flag we stood holding, Nub's new conscripts, Mobius the hold we had on where we were, applique figures, cloth. We were real, it seemed, more than cut out. It seemed, seeming so, we were. We were cloth filled with flutter, flap, featherless, birds in word only, cut from cloth. There we stood, looking out at the sky, lit sky bursting with sparks the night before, cat's back sky arching over us, clawed feet scratching the balcony floor. Carnival's retreat left us wondering where we stood. Costume courtesy, a thing of the past. Fireworks the night before kept exploding, more and more real the more Carnival receded, more and more like war the more we stood beset by vertigo, more and more the more Quag's ashes fell. No matter where we stood exposed. Quag's fallout put our feet to sleep. We stood on pins. Feathers flew, threads unraveled. Itamar's bobbing head said we were soon to be debris. Nub's new makoots, flags notwithstanding. Nub's new burlap sacks. We were wishing we were kids again, ate popcorn, played arcade games, a day at the amusement park. Lone Coast boardwalk about to be washed away. We stood looking out at where Moo had once been. No matter where we stood unsteady. No matter where we stood would not stay put. We of the golden soul, we of the golden instep, we of the golden ankle, even so. The day before the morning after was all outwardness, what would otherwise not have been. Golden day gilded in retrospect, day after day's bequest. Quag's new truth we swallowed look like, birds in reverse disguise. Look like fed us, food for thought, food Quag's ash took the taste from. Burnt book of glimpse, glance, eyelight, look, some said, soul was. The instruments faded as the sun went down. Ever after's day after it last ended, astral abutment, cosmic arrest. It was a cappella night at the orphanage, Carnival's night after dispatch. Where we stood felt more and more like arrival. Plucked wing feathers fell and were lifted and fell. Night's night after condolence, night's never address. I'm going to switch to prose for a little while. Sarah mentioned From a Broken Bottle, Traces of Perfume Still Emanate, a series of novels or a serial novel that I've been writing for a while. And just this summer, the first 3 volumes were published as one volume. From a Broken Bottle, Traces of Perfume Still Emanate, volumes 1 through 3. And that's comprised of Bedouin Hornbook, Jabhat Bagostis' Run, and Atet A.D. The writing is in the form of letters, letters written by a composer, multi-instrumentalist, who signs his letters N, period. and they're addressed to an angel. Dear angel of dust, they all begin. And they have to do with a band in Los Angeles in the late 70s and early 80s that N is a part of, one of the founding members of. Originally called the Deconstructive Woodwind Chorus, and gone through a number of name changes. Mystic Horn Society, most recently called Molimo Matet. And the form is a kind of grab bag. And I want to read just some passages from Atet AD, Volume 3, some passages toward the end. The writing is writing that's marked by time. The chapters, if you can call them that, are introduced by a heading that is a date. And it's writing that's very much concerned with time and in the multiple senses. Angel of Dust is a figure of ephemerality, of that which is fleeting and will go, impermanence. And I began writing them in the late 70s while living in Los Angeles, wanting to get more of the grid of particulars into my work, but also wanting to serve this this beacon that music has been for me from very early on. So I imagine myself to be a musician. But it's very much concerned with time. In fact, there was a chapter written on this work, a recent critical book called Qualified Hope, something, a postmodern theory of time or something, has a chapter on these Angel of Dust letters. I didn't know it was so obvious, but but yeah, kind of obsessed. Anyway, let me read a couple of sections. This is from a letter from September of 1982. Ian writes about a gig that took place in Long Beach. We played at a place in Long Beach called the Blue Light Lounge last night. It was a gig which had its moments, the one that stays with me most being one that occurred as we were playing Altered Cross. Lambert was soloing on tenor, Aunt Nancy behind him on bass, Jamila on piano, Drenette on drums. He was into a deep crouch, bent over, his horn all but grazing the floor, bellowing as though caught in some harsh quandary. Conflicted claims mixing sanctity and sacrilege. He thrashed and brayed, a voice from the depths. But suddenly Aunt Nancy, Jamila, and Drenette broke into an up-tempo bossa nova, a bounding waltz-time extenuation for which Drenette's stick on the snare's metal rim kept time with even measures of mirth and residual menace, ambidextrous foil and fellow traveler to Jamila's light but elated right hand. Aunt Nancy's bass figure evinced as tide-like ebb and flow, a lusty recurrent swell and subsidence, the four fingers of her left hand scurrying about the bass's fingerboard like an alarmed half spider. The bass line, it seemed, said it all, though in this instance all meant no saying, said enough. Lambert, taken by surprise, relied at first on a captious, expectorant croon reminiscent of Archie Shepp's way of playing The Girl from Ipanema, a now abrasive, now caressive growl with which he bought time. However, time bought, new bearings gotten, he took a mellower tack, a forthright ride of the rhythm section's role in recurrence, a willingness to be carried along, even carried away, a transparent, it doesn't bother me facade by way of which he backed away from his earlier abject air. Puncturing such willingness and the wave it rode, however, was an intermittent pass in which Lambert, meditative, sotto voce, let the rhythm section chime louder behind him. It was a turning to himself which bespoke misgiving, albeit misgiving mixed with guileful resolve. It seemed he reasoned with the troublesome remnant of his earlier disarray, pestered but philosophic, up to the task. It was a good example of what John Gilmore means by contrary motion. The rhythm section's bodily blare and relentless forwarding was countered by Lambert's reflective step back, such misgiven retreat a clearly fictive sublation whose insinuative trace proffered ghost and body both. Neither hoarse nor laryngitic, Lambert's sotto voce tack resonated, a soliloquistic aside whose elegiac reflection on the furtherance the rhythm section fostered freighted such furtherance with a bittersweet adamance, as though time were so infectiously marked, only to lament its loss. But Jeanette, head held high, resolutely tapping the rim of the snare, would have none of this, or would have it, having to, only in such mixed emotional ray as Jamila's bright right-hand proclamations and at Nancy's ambulant ebb and flow Bruder brought out. Time slipped away, she allowed, but only to be swung by the track or trail it drew with it. It was frighteningly beautiful the way they brokered, so duplicit a piece with the passing of time. In works on a series of writings that he calls part of an antithetic opera. He calls them lecture librettos or lecture libretti, and he includes them in letters to the Angel of Dust. And there's one that concludes the book, Atet A.D. It's called Door Peep Shall Not Enter. And it's a part of this creaking of the word operatic series, as I've said. And in this one, a couple of, what would you call them? Tutelary spirits, one by the name of Balloon, the other by the name of Jabouche, wash ashore in, I guess, what you'd have to call ambiguous glass vessels. Part champagne bottle, part a test tube. And they wash ashore onto Venice Beach in Southern California. And they're accompanied by a curious sound that only a few people hear. And I'll read the sense of that N gives. One of the band members, the drummer, Jeanette, is figured in the piece as Jeanette Scientist. Unseen but otherwise there, Jeanette Scientist loomed larger than life. Backdrop and animating breeze rolled into one, assisting the wave which washed the bottles ashore at Venice Beach, rechristened by the bottle's arrival, Venus Beach. Blown bottle sonority filled the air, a hoarse but penetrant tone as of an Arabico Berber flute. Faint, frail, it had the sound of having come a long way, the subtlest felt-filled sonority ever to have entered L.A. Very few of those at Venus Beach showed any sign of having heard it. The skaters went on skating as though nothing had happened. The weightlifters lifted weights as though nothing had happened. Tourists taking pictures as though nothing had happened. All but a scattered few went on doing what they were doing as though nothing had happened. Those few, however, heard a frail, faint something endowing the otherwise ordinary sky with elegiac primer, sad scientific base, virgin patina. Blown bottle austerity, attended by synthesizer strings, made for a synthetico-symphonic sky, burgeoning crescendo endlessly all but absconded with, beginning to bid sensation goodbye. Those few turned their heads to see the source of what they heard, but couldn't find it. Some of those who were sitting or who lay on their stomachs or backs stood up to get a better look, to no avail. What they saw was not the source of what they heard, but one of its effects, an erotic elegiac graininess bestowed upon or merely brought out in the surrounding flesh, tanning bodies on display, jogging bodies on display, weightlifting bodies on display, skating bodies on display. Blown bottle sonority peppered all flesh with a flute-blown abrasion as of wind-blown sand, granted it a buff which was not untouched by weather, bruise, wear, grit-given scour, grit-given scratch. Up to this point, flesh had reclined lazily within itself, even that of those engaged in strenuous exertion. But with the advent of blown bottle sonority, a quality of strain, and aroused ahead of itself nostalgia for bodily abidance, pervaded and could be seen on the skin of all those within view. Seen with such acuity, it seemed one could taste it, Sad scientific foresight gave skin a spiked philosophic savor. Virgin science a newly provident salt, laboratory sweat. Here and there, the few who heard the blown bottle sonority pinched or scratched or otherwise touched themselves, rubbed an arm or a leg or massaged a wrist, newly apprised of their body's unarrestable transit. The strung sky mourned an insistent furtherance it was also an exponent of. The risen power grit-given scratch had been taken to, fond Empyrean scrub. The sound, faint and frail as it was, sharpened itself on skin and sky alike. Mimicking flesh or proposing a model for flesh, the sky too got a scoured look, wiped and rubbed with an abrasive agent which gave it a close-to-the-bone burnish, buffed obsceity, high-strung strop. Faint, increasingly fraught, blown bottle sonority kept close to the water, and once ashore, close to the ground. It could well have been a broom, so sustained and adnate was the sweep it advanced. It grazed the ocean and the shore with an aspirate slide implying meek persistence, a readiness to sweep them clean of water and sand, lose itself in the effort. Such willingness to indulge futility compounded the press of grainy transit imbued on the sky in the eyes of those who heard it. Its futile willingness or wish to sweep sand and sea away notwithstanding, it proposed itself as a potential coat, a protective cover against vain endeavor. It was an inoculative indulgence, it turned out, meant to ward off undue expectation. This had to do with the ascetic scientific tack Jabouche, had his bottle borne a note, would have expounded, been an exponent of. As it was, he found his ostensibly no-note approach complicated by the sonic sweep which bore him and balloon ashore. The blown bottle sonority's willingness to indulge futility warned against a willingness to woo frustration. It was nonetheless hard to know how to read it, implicated as inextricably as he was. Indulgence as antithetic omen bore a mixed message which further mixed his own. This, he was beginning to find out, was what being in a test tube meant. Let me go back to Nod House and read one poem from there, and then let me finish up with some things from a more recent poetry manuscript. Again, from the Moose series, Moose 61st part. It's called Ghost of a Trance. This is the sort of thing that listening to Anthony Braxton can do to you. Gray morning, blue morning, a feather blown between. Mashed earth incumbent, gone up from under, never more naked if ever to be naked, brink what it was to be on. Where next we came, stick figure people greeted us. Abstract was abstract, also something else. Line, shape, extension, each other than itself. Of number, we'd have said the same. Aspect arrested us, riveted we stood. Stick figure epiphany held us in our tracks. Everyone's bones in full view. Gray morning, blue morning, an unheard string between. Bad heads morning reluctance, ennui's next day dispatch. We were chill, shiver, exegetic sweat, backed up interpreters put upon by slough. None of us could say what was what. Pale admonishment poised upon lack, like to unlike, pale strain recumbent, recombinant, rude amniotic straw. Took leave long since taken, awoke to what would otherwise not have been. We contested birth. We wanted to be pre-undumbuloous, done dead Gnostics again. Sound bubbled up. It kept bubbling. Sonic residue, sonic remit. A fickle sonnets, fraught sonnets, warning we knew nothing. Stick figure entourage, otherwise issueless, beginning to be remiss, it seemed. Erstwhile ecstatics, lapsed enchantment, trance gone none could say since when. Ghost of what lifted us, ghost what lifted us, erstwhile enchantment between. Fell back, full out extended. Pilgrim, someone called me. I said no, then I said yes. Brax was on the box, was what it was, toned uncertainty. Stick figure counsel, all air, edge, angle, down from where we'd been, and we were again where the alone lived. Adage, had it not been so abstract, it might have been. Long day of the abalone shell sunset. Stood among redwoods expecting the worst. What was of note and what abjured nothing? What was all, none, one, all the same? It was the ghost of a trance. I was a guest of the trance. What went on, we blamed on the ghost. It was the ghost of a trance, each of us a guest of the trance. No two times were the same. When we hit a wrong note, we said nothing. When we hit the right note, we said, so what? Tell my horse, we were told. Fluke, solace. Horse we were mounted by. What was done by the ghost. Gray morning, blue morning, eternity between. Told my horse we would gather at Nod House, down drinks in the no-host bar. Dirt was in the drinks we drank, planet sludge. Double take told its horse woe, told it unwoe, back and forth and back without end. Talk spun our heads, told our horses ride on, unresolved which to insist on, stick with. Could it woe unwoes ramble unresolved? Spinning heads made us feel we sat on swivel seats. Double take talked us in, took us in. Sat again at the same table, no two times the same. Twinship long since gone. Leaned back, the back legs of our chairs broke. Nod House nubs new address. A straining look made our faces look raw, made our skin flush. Dreamt each other's dream, donned each other's costume, hosted one another. One stepped in as one stepped out. Let me read a few poems from a book in progress that doesn't have a title yet. I think it's going to be two sections. The first section will be called Rog, and the second section will be called Rag. This is from Rog. A night in Jaipur. Lakshmi wept as we made our way outward. Blue devotion's annuity looped and led back. Reluctance's allure yet to accrue. Larger than life, they'd lain belly to belly. Patch of hair pressing patch of hair, leg pressing leg. All they'd have otherwise been held in abeyance. Krishna's remnant kiss. Whatever after-the-fact embrace had hold of her, we listened. Bamboo hollow, the heart of it. Bamboo flutes burnt opening, blown on. Whole, his breath finessed. Flush, lozenge, lipped, let go of. Tongue to have tarried on tongue, less than a memory. Sound, what might have been. Lakshmi wept as we made our way, birth after birth. Two-headed hollow, beaten on at both ends. Log we slept in. Mirrors amanuensis. Mud bouquet. Sat gameless at the gaming table. Sitar glint, knuckling the nights, one luster, spoke sputter, made sputter speak. A diffuse kiss, low to the ground, blue reconnoiter. Voice also known as Rack Tavern. Bar, be my altar, it sang. Simi sang, Simi wept. Lakshmi's bond and abatement, held but not had held, churchical girth, caught strings, cut our thumbs. Insofar as there was an I, it wasn't hers, we heard her insinuate, of late begun to be elsewhere, the late one she'd one day be. Simi sang, Simi wept as we sat lost at the gaming table. Thumbs, all thumbs, no thumbs to hold on with. Held, not had, was her new way. What had its way with us? Held, not had, her numb regret. Lakshmi sang as we sat stuck at the gaming table, hands tied down by sympathetic strings. To be was to be at her behest. Sought bodily solace, bodilessness, reluctant allure, it seemed. A certain way she had with Krishna's going, beautiful rebuff, she made it seem. We'd been born by a wind we hardly knew was blowing, rung notes lingering moment to moment, phonic perfume, it seemed. Seemed it said cover, seemed it said collect, seemed it bid reaching goodbye, went on reaching, seemed it told all it said, no. We sat aloft looking in on ourselves. 5 layers we'd have to get through to get what lay underneath. A low hum came from under the gaming table. Chance's debt reneged on. Romance's bet called off. And let me read this poem, which was requested. I read it at the Duncan Conference in Chicago a few months back, and Sarah was there and was kind enough to ask me to read it again. In fact, it was one of the first things she did when she picked me up at the airport. That doesn't happen very often, so yeah. Happy to be here. It's called Antibiotic Jukebox. Skin, bone, meat, blood, suspect. We were again on our way somewhere else. Body suspect, gone what soul was. Ohlone games dropping painted sticks lay behind us. Lone coast receded. We moved on. Sentient wind we'd be one with again. Lost what soul once was. Lone coast, honed edge we heard our feet on. Again we were beginning to be gone. As though there'd long since been only one sun, blank sun, the one sun's eventual end. Blank blacked in, thick indelible ink, bird beak stylus, again we'd soon be gone. For now it was only a window I stood at, a boat-bodied harp on the box as I looked out. Maman looked over my shoulder. Reverend King, the next cut, came up. Laughter broke out. We'd all been weeping. Sob held at bay by giggle. We burst out laughing, happy to hear time turn back. Train's bass reed made us laugh, keep crying. Dolphy's clarinet, high resolve. Dolphy's clarinet, high carouse. Ribcage theater, tease, tickle. Long fingers working what was down, deeper. Laughed though we did, although we wept. We slapped hands and were laughing, happy to be young again, glad not knowing better, knew better. Not one death but many we'd heard, and the breath now said the same. The other box, the box we were stuck in, sound, our one release. Bent pitch gave rise, we insisted, to what words gave reason to be. Each the eventual ghost we sometimes were, each that all would end up there. An announcement, notes posted as we made our way out. One felt a friend's gaze cross one's right shoulder. What one looked at, also looked at from and back. Husk it was, one heard, its unsteadiness. Reed's unwieldiness, the boon it now was. Captious, we heard it crack. Thus the bird boys dreamt kin came to include us. Cracked husks fissures, whispering. Droll whistle we fell back from. A Sahelian furtherance it was we heard. Salif Keita, another new cut on the box. We pursed our lips, bit seeds, albeit the box fell apart. The utopic box it continued to be. pursed our lips, bit seeds, gap all that was left, bit seeds, broke our teeth. Air sucked in through the all the emptiness was. Bodiless, we all stood as one. Sprung Polity's pneumatic jukebox it was, my friend and I surmised. Each of them the ghost he or she would eventually be, crevice and protuberance, moot. What would be there? What would not? Friend whispering into one's ear, maybe not. Polity we stood as though we were. The window showed a shoebox garden, green's wild edge turned in on green itself, blade rolled into each leaf, blood each leaf's reglet. We stood transfixed by the box's pull upward, a balloon or a kite it might have been. A new cut sang the singer's beloved, recalled her dressed in only a scarf, and on the scarf the smell of neck sweat, late night's adjutant perfume. It was the glass's way of speaking we saw, window pane, bell jar thick. Would we get there? What we saw be what we'd get. Belled horns, bellow again. Reverend King came back to us, neck sweat notwithstanding, belled horns bellow, bray. We stood reminded we'd been there before, caught in the wall's rumble, salt box dismay, we swayed inside. Rumble was back, rubble, wall all window again. Atlantis, East St. Louis, either, might have been both. It was a march we were caught up in, commencement, a march we consoled ourselves. Marched, albeit we stood unmoving, stood hoisted high, we'd have said. Jericho, we'd have said, wall falling, wall all rung, even so. Hoisted, albeit we stood, our legs dangled, feet came off the floor. The horns played hurt, it sounded like. We ascended the wall that wasn't there. Where were we? We were gone so soon, we demanded they tell us. See through brink and abeyance, my friend and I, and the we, I what said. We were spawn of what tore loose, our legs dangled, mud clumps fell from our feet. A call climbed our throats as though it were we the horns enlisted, moo what was otherwise wall stuff, adobe, colloquy of straw. Abide, my friend, I heard myself say, the box's mouthpiece it seemed. Wood lips, box head, box body. Abide, I said, even so. It wasn't huff, however much it seemed so, the friend who stood at my back and to my right. Box head, wood lips, box body. Shadow box, cardboard insides. Abide, I said, more to myself it might have been, wood lips, box body, box tongue. Late aspect, late luxurious music, endless till it ended, we found out. Stood happy sad at the sonic window, O mani padme hum, the glass we looked in through, bell as in bellow again. Fret not thyself, my friend said, it seemed I said, bell as in bellow blared on. Death-obsessed friend and foe, which is familiar, fret not thyself, I did say. Empty window, moo as in moot. I do believe, I said it seemed, I said. And I will end with a recent poem called Hafriyati Head Opening. I was reading a book by an anthropologist named Janice Body. It's called Wombs and Alien Spirits, Women, Men, and the Tsar Cult in northern Sudan. And she writes about a group of people whom she gives the made-up name Hafriyati. And it's a possession cult called the Tsar Cult. And Tsar comes up in my work earlier, as early as School of Udra, with the Tsar spirits in Ethiopian scrolls, but also the city of Zar in African American folklore, which is just this side of Far. And there's an epigraph from Boddy's book. For spirits, ambivalence and ambiguity are windows of opportunity. Zar is a kind of meta-language, an ingenious comment on the existence of ambiguity in human affairs. Pigeon broth carried us over, spilled over, spoons above our heads as we descended. Zar, the city we came to, Zar, one's host and rider, northern Sudan, arrayed at our feet. Spoon, our bane and balm, we cried, spoonful, red wind, in from the east. Spoonful, I crooned and cried, spoonful. Loquats inside my head outside my window, bunched fruit umbilicus held at bay. Loquat cluster connoted youth, I fell back singing, voice giving out as I got to my favorite part. Song of the otherwise unsung it turned out to be. Loquat connoted lapse. I was the lady among the leaves, and I was the Lord looking up from under, our legs open books, interpreter. I wore red, I wore wide-leg pants and a billowing shirt. I wore a shawl, I wore a fez, a jalabia. Spoonful, we crooned again, wooed our host and rider. Lady of the loquat clump, we rode and were, threads tight wind and release. We of the big seed, we of the blunt cluster, and old illness older than books. An ancient updraft, we wanted waftedness, whiff, incense, vanishing sweat. Head split, burgeoning seed it seemed, axe's edge, and head, my headdress. Respiteless, Hafriyati stress. Parallax made me sick, parodic husband, parodic wife. Parodic ram's head smeared with henna. Zar was my prince, my pride. Lit sticks lay on the floor between my feet, floated incense. Thread was the pull of the air. Attitude, moment of truth. Lurch, parallactic dispatch. We were what we wore, what we were. We were what we wore became us. Drums led, strung us along, beats, quick stitches. Thread connected us, we wore pants, we wore skirts. Thread costumed us, held us up, made us up, branch bit by his and her wind affliction. Illness older than books, its own book, book of what was barely there. Sewn lips, no impediment, drum spun, dreamt we possessed ourselves. There were notes hung from branches, faint, scribbly whatnots, sound more than scent, Lebanese perfume. We splashed it on, parodic excess, winced, wandered off. So much for turned heads, we said. Say it again's envoys. So much for turned heads, we said. Heuristic Egyptians, we ate chickpeas, hawk's heads, Horaces, washed it down with pigeon broth, sat, sipped, shook. Spoonful, I sang out. Spoonful. I was possessed. I wasn't there. I was a woman, a man, one or the other, sometimes both. Spoonful, my pledge and protest. I sang at soprano. I sang at baritone. They pulled a twig from under my skin, boiled it with onions, called it soup. Spoonful, heart's content. I stood on stilts. It seemed I saw England. I saw frenzy all around. I wasn't there. I wore thread. Thread led me on. I stood on stilts. It seemed I saw Babylon. Thread's far side, cloth covered me, there though I wasn't there. Spoonful filled me with distance, imminence, ghost what I was, guest I'd have been, Czar's new inhabitant, me. Thread led me on, fed me, twig taken out of my chest, a new suit, spoonful's gruel, my regret. Spoonful, I groaned again, spoonful, Spoon so abrupt it broke through. Spoon my disguise, my redoubt, I was obsessed. Thread my dismay, I was upset. Spoon hit the side of my head, set me off. Dystrophy's dance, I knew. Allegoric spill, allegoric sprawl. Allegory meant someone was watching. Spoon, I said and said again, sighed more than said. Spoon's alibi thread cut my lip, I lay entranced. Spoon dug inside my skull, scooped out what was there. Spoon lifted me up, let me down. I looked over my shoulder, filled me, foreboding, fret. A cracked head's hymnal sung from. So it seemed as we and I came down again. On the banks of the indifferent river, recollected loquats, low squat ruse. Made our way toward Medicineville, getting better. Balm the hasp hair was, lock where legs met. Thank you.